Talk about print media, we can talk about broadcast media, but let's face it, that's not what you guys are getting in media. The internet is taking over. More and more studies show that particularly people under the age of now 30, maybe even 40, overwhelmingly turn to the internet to get their information, their news. And we talked about the idea of narrowcasting, of targeting a smaller and smaller audience. And the internet is, in fact, doesn't have the potential, it is doing this on a massive scale. And so today, you can go on the internet and you can find news outlets, blogs, YouTube videos, or whatever it is, that really target your particular perspective in exactly what you want to talk about. And this is a dramatic change from the old days of three news networks and kind of a consensus of opinion in the country. Now that has been fractured to an almost infinite degree due to things like the internet. Another criticism, or a major criticism of media, is that it is largely corporate controlled. There's only a small number of TV stations that are publicly owned in America, PBS stations. Most of them are owned by corporations, and a lot of those are owned by large corporations. And they are dependent on advertising revenues. And so a couple of consequences here. One, the purpose of media is not to inform. The purpose of media is to get ratings, is to get people to watch. And if they can do that by giving you good, well-reported, solid news, that's what they're going to do. If they can do that by giving you sensational, fantastic stories, that's what they're going to do. If they can do it by targeting people's fears, that's what they'll do. Which is why when you watch particularly local news, it'll often lead with a car crash. Well, the car crash doesn't have much to do with you unless you know the people involved, and you probably don't. There's probably things, city ordinances, they're doing something with the water, something like that has a much greater effect on your life. But people tend to find those stories boring. So what do? We get celebrity gossip. We get violence. We get car accidents. We get endless reports on health department reports on restaurants. One person does something dumb somewhere in the country, and if they're a kid, every news outlet in the country will report this crazy thing this one kid did to scare you because you might think your kid will do it. Media has also been conglomerated into chains. We talked about the old days where there might be 8 or even a dozen newspapers in a large city. Even small cities would have 2 or 3. Those days are gone. Media outlets have consolidated, so there are fewer and fewer voices. For example, in Austin, there used to be the Austin American and the Austin Statesman. Well, one of them bought the other one out, and now we have the Austin American Statesman. That's why the Dallas Morning News is the Dallas Morning News. There was actually, that may not be the case. But the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, there was a St. Louis Post and a St. Louis Dispatch. Or I mentioned the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. There was a Post and Intelligencer, and they combined. But this is happening with broadcast media as well. And so in reality, you have just a small number of corporations like GE, who controls the NBC networks, or Disney, who controls a lot of networks as well, or News Corp, which controls Fox and all its affiliates, a small number of corporations controlling media outlets. And many critics have pointed out that it's very, very hard to do stories that are critical of these large corporations because they're not really interested in reporting bad things about themselves. So let's talk about reporting the news. First off, the media picks what is news. Now, news reporters will have beats, which is a specific thing they cover. So you might have a beat where you cover the White House, or you might have a beat where you cover the city hall in your local city. A news reporter's beat might be the New York Yankees. And so reporters are assigned to cover different things. What will happen then is relationships will develop between the reporters and what they're covering. And then so what we really have is a situation where they have a symbiotic relationship. They are dependent upon each other. And so the reporter becomes dependent on his sources, people he knows and sees every day because he covers them. And the sources are dependent upon the reporter to get their message out. Now, if the reporter goes and upsets his sources, he won't have sources anymore. And, of course, the media wants to keep a friendly relationship with the people being reported on want to keep a friendly relationship with the reporters so they can get friendly coverage. One way we see this is in trial balloons. Trial balloons are where you intentionally leak information to reporters and then have them report it as unverified, and then you see how the public reacts. If the public reacts positively, you come out and you go, oh yeah, that's totally what was going on. If the public reacts negatively, you say, oh, it's bad reporting. I don't know where they got that. Politicians do this all the time. If the president is going to enact a new policy or a candidate is thinking about who to pick for vice president, they're going to launch trial balloons, get stories into the paper that they can then later deny if the reaction is negative. But that's a trial balloon. It's important that we understand how dependent reporters are on their sources. And this is one of the things that really undermines any sort of investigative or critical journalism. Reporters know that if they report things that the subject doesn't like, then they won't get interviews anymore. They won't get talked to anymore. A lot of people will point to Woodward and Bernstein, the two guys who wrote the Watergate story. But it's really important for you to understand that they had no clout. They had no sources. Bernstein was a city reporter who was kind of not very well liked by management, apparently. And Woodward's job was to sit overnight. He'd been there less than a year. Was to sit overnight in the court where they brought in like the drunks and stuff and report if anything interesting happened. The reason they broke that story wasn't because they had great sources. Although Woodward, through previous his life before he was a reporter, knew some people in Washington who ended up helping him. But as a reporter, he really didn't have any sources. And so they didn't really have anything to lose by reporting this big breaking story. The rest of the media, honestly, just reported what Nixon said. And so I think we often misunderstand Watergate and how that works. Another thing that the media relies on and politicians rely on is what's called the sound bite. A sound bite is where they take a little clip of something that somebody said and then put it on the news. Recently here in the 2012 election, Mitt Romney has taken a beating in the polls after saying that he didn't even care about trying to appeal to 47% of the population. Well, that was a sound bite. It was a little clip of something he said. And you see here on this chart the average length of what a candidate says that gets reported on the news. Back in 1968, the average clip of a candidate speaking was 43 seconds long. Today, in 2004, it was 7.8 seconds long. And so if you're a candidate, you have to know how to get your message out in literally just a few words. They say if it can't fit on a bumper sticker, then it's too long. One of the things that's constant is accusations that news media is biased. Both sides do this, although really beginning with, and it's always been around, Hamilton and Jefferson, for example, both hired newspaper editors to put out supposedly unbiased newspapers with their point of view. Richard Nixon really took this to an art form during Watergate, accusing everybody who was trying to come after him for Watergate of being biased. And since then, it's been a staple, particularly on the conservative side, this idea that the media is all lying to you. Now, studies have shown that the media is not particularly biased towards a particular ideology, and journalists tend to make an attempt to be objective, to play it down the middle. Now, news reporting is biased, but it's not biased towards the left or the right or conservatives or or progressives or Republicans or Democrats. It's biased towards what's going to make news, what people care about. These are, as I've said before, these are corporations trying to make money. And so they're trying to put out the story that's going to get the most attention. So I remember here, it's 2012. Recently this year, we've had a woman breastfeeding on the cover in a very controversial photo of Newsweek. Well, they didn't put that out to support some sort of breastfeeding agenda. They put it out because they knew it would be controversial and get a lot of people talking, a lot of people to pick up that magazine. So, and again, any story that has good video is likely to do well, particularly on TV or the internet. So, for example, if you look at this chart here of stories that citizens have tuned into or tuned out of, at the very top you see the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger and the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, Hurricane Katrina, Los Angeles riots. These are all things with extraordinary video. They're also all things that are extremely emotional. If you look down at the bottom, you see the 2003 Supreme Court decision on campaign finance reform. Well, that's an extremely important news story, but there's no good video. It doesn't have a real emotional component. You might wonder why the violent protest in Tibet against the Chinese government in 2008 got so little attention. Well, it's foreign, and we tend to care more about domestic stuff. But more importantly, there wasn't video. The Chinese didn't let video out of that. If there was video of those people being persecuted, believe me, it would have been a much, much bigger story.